Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for tuning into my channel, Memoirs of a Horseman. I'm your host, Horseman, and today I'm sharing another story from my past. This was the day we met the red fox. But let me tell you, this wasn't just any fox. In the world I've walked, every encounter carries meaning. Every sign holds a message, and sometimes what seems like a simple animal is far more than it appears. This story takes place in Sequoia National Forest's hunting zone D9, where I learned a lesson that still resonates with me today: the dangers of misidentification while hunting. Hunting demands split-second decisions, and even the smallest mistake can have devastating consequences. My experience that day opened my eyes to just how critical it is to pause, assess, and ensure accuracy before pulling the trigger. By sharing my story, I hope to prevent accidental hunting accidents and ultimately help save lives. The Red Fox. It was fall of 1999, and I have just passed my driving test. It was one of those milestones that felt huge for a teenager at that time. The beginning of something big, like my world had finally opened up. I could go wherever I wanted, whenever I wanted. It was freedom. That night, things shifted. I woke up in the dark, gasping for air and drenched in sweat. My heart was racing like I'd been running for my life. In the dream, I was out in the woods with my cousin, the same place we hunted multiple times before. We hiked down a steep mountain and were searching for a small creek to scout for gray squirrels. The forest was in complete silence. Every now and then, we saw something moving out of the corner of our eyes. Too fast to know what it was, but enough to make its presence known. Then all of a sudden it came running out of the tree lines. There it was. It stopped and sat on a large tree stump, staring at us. My cousin tightened his grip on the shotgun. Neither of us said anything for a moment. We just stared back at that fox, waiting for it to do something. And then I heard it, a low chuckling laugh from the fox. It turned its head towards us and had a large grin on its face. I looked at my cousin, hoping to see some kind of reassurance, but his face was pale as if he'd seen a ghost. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" he whispered, barely audible. I just nodded, too scared to speak. Then, without warning, he lifted his shotgun and fired. The blast shattered the silence, ripping through the trees, echoing throughout the forest. And then the red fox vanished. My father called out, "Get up. We need to get ready. Load up the truck and go. Uncle is waiting for us." I woke up and sat in bed. It was only a dream, I told myself, but it felt so real. Later that morning, we hit the road and headed for Long Beach to meet up with my uncle. I couldn't get the dream out of my head, so I decided to tell my father about it. I described the forest, the fox, the laugh, and the gunshot. I expected him to tell me that we should reconsider going, but all he said was, "Don't worry. It was just a dream. There is nothing to be afraid of." We kept driving, and I sat there trying to shake off the feeling of fear from the dream. We hopped on Interstate 5 North, following my uncle's truck towards the Sequoia National Forest's hunting zone, D9. Before we hit the turnoff into the mountains, we made our usual stop at the Shell station to refuel. As we were pumping gas, a familiar Toyota pickup pulled up next to us. It was a few guys we knew from Long Beach, all geared up for their own hunting trip. While exchanging laughs and catching up with each other, before we knew it, we decided to head out together towards the infamous Big Rock. We woke the next morning at 4 a.m., split into 3 groups, and proceeded to hike down to the valley. In our group was my father, my cousin, and me. At this time, my cousin was 15 years old and I was 16. The forest around us was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. We didn't talk much, just focused on our footing and the path ahead. When we got about halfway down, my father stopped. He looked out over the valley, then turned to us. I'm going to head further south. This way we cover more ground and we'll meet up later. Without waiting for a reply, he headed off, his figure quickly blending into the darkness. My cousin and I continued east, straight down the mountain. The slope was steep, the ground sandy soft, and we had to be careful not to lose our footing. The further down we went, the thicker the trees became, their branches almost blocking out the moonlight. It felt like the forest was closing in on us. After what felt like hours, we heard the sound of water. Relieved, we followed it until we stumbled upon a small creek. We paused for a moment, catching our breath. The creek felt like a lifeline in the thick silence of the woods after that rough road to get here. Something felt different this time around, as if we weren't alone and was being watched. I felt a cold shiver, and the hair on my arms was standing up. A rustling sound came from the trees to our left, faint but distinct. We froze, looking at each other. I knew he was thinking the same thing. What the hell was that? Then, without warning, a powerful gust of wind swept through the forest, bending the trees and kicking up dust. An enormous eagle swooped down from the sky, circling once before landing on a massive pine tree high above us. The way its wings sliced through the air made the whole valley stand still in silence. It didn't just look majestic. You can feel this incredible energy as it flapped its wings. It stood on top of the tree looking directly at us. Its head turned with precision, tracking our every movement as if it were studying us. An uneasy feeling weighted heavy in the air and felt like we were no longer in control of the moment. I cocked my shotgun, sliding a shell into the chamber, steadied my grip, and my finger hovering near the trigger. If it made a move towards us, I was ready to fire. We decided to continue further down the valley until we hit the bottom and found a spot to rest. Suddenly, I felt tired and told my cousin to keep an eye out while I took a quick power nap. I had barely closed my eyes when my cousin whistled. "What are you whistling at?" I whispered. "Red fox," he muttered, nodding toward the tree line. My stomach dropped. I sat up fast and scanned the trees. There it was, just like in my dream. A red fox sitting on a tree stump about 50 yards away, facing away from us. Then it did something that sent shivers down my spine. It turned its head 180 degrees and stared at us. The creepy thing was that the body of the fox did not move. The ominous grin that spread across its face was wide, reminding me of the Joker's smile from Batman. It seemed to be enjoying the moment as it continued to look at us in silence. Then, just like in my dream, the fox started chuckling and laughing. The laugh seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then, without warning, my cousin raised his shotgun and fired. The blast echoed throughout the valley, breaking the silence. For a second, everything was still, and then a voice full of pain and disbelief yelled out, "I'm shot!" It was my father. His voice, filled with shock and agony, cut through me like a knife. Time seemed to freeze, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. I fumbled for my 32mm revolver, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. I fired 3 shots into the air, the emergency signal we'd all been drilled to learn and use. The sharp cracks of the gunfire echoed back, each one amplifying the terror gripping my heart. Moments later, we heard a reply, 3 shots, a sign of relief that help was near. It felt like a lifetime before we saw anyone. Finally, 4 men emerged from the trees. They were the Hmong guys from the gas station we knew from Long Beach. They rushed to my father, carefully lifting him while his blood was dripping, staining the ground beneath him. As they started the painful trek back up the mountain with my father, I volunteered my cousin and I to go find his parents. At this time, we didn't have cell phones or good radios to communicate with, so we had to find them. To be honest, I didn't even know where to start looking for them. We grabbed a few bottles of water and a bag of beef jerky from my father and started the search. We followed the stream downhill, hoping it would lead us out of the valley. It felt like we'd been walking for hours, yet kept ending up in the same area, like we were walking in a loop. Maybe we're just exhausted, I told myself. But that didn't explain the footsteps. They started soft, barely there, but always a beat behind us. I stopped, glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see another hiker. Instead, I froze. I saw us, me and my cousin, a few paces back, following our exact steps. My heart hammered in my chest. What is this? I looked forward, and my cousin was still there, walking ahead of me, completely unaware. But behind us were our shadows, moving in sync. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine. This isn't real, I thought. Or am I just tired? Hey, I called out to my cousin, but my voice seemed swallowed by the silence around us. My cousin turned his head and answered, but his voice came from behind me. Yet, he was right there, in front of me. That cold dread settled in, thick and heavy. Stay calm, I told myself, forcing myself to hold steady. Stop it, I whispered, like I could make whatever was following us disappear. I caught up to my cousin, grabbing his shoulder. We need to go up, I said, barely above a whisper. Something's wrong. I think we're being followed. He looked at me, his face pale, and I knew he felt it too. We turned our backs on the valley and started climbing. I could still hear those footsteps, trailing just behind us, patient and unhurried, like they knew we would not get away. When I was 9 years old, visions have come to me like silent whispers, as though I were playing a game of Pictionary in my own mind. The images flash like a silent black and white movie, but I've learned to interpret their meanings. It always begins the same way, a faint ringing in my ear, followed by a subtle twitch in my eye. It's a signal, a forewarning that something unseen is drawing near. This time, the vision was more intense than ever before. I felt an unshakable urge to act. Reaching for my Hmong knife, with a firm hand, I drew a line on the ground behind us, a boundary carved into the earth as if sealing an often invisible door. With a stern voice, your path is cut off from ours, and we are not to be followed, or my knife will cut you into 3 pieces. For a moment, time seemed to stop. My instincts screamed to flee, but my feet were rooted to the ground. It was as though the shadow was waiting and testing me. I gripped my knife tighter and held my ground. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the shadow dissolved into thin air. No sound, no trace, only the lingering cold that crawled up my skin. Whatever it was, it had acknowledged the boundary I set. We continued on our way, but the moment stayed with me, echoing in my thoughts. Was it a test? A warning? Or had I truly separated its path from ours? The air felt lighter now, as if we had crossed into safer territory. But I knew better than to let my guard down. After hours of hiking, we finally made it to the other valley and found my aunt and uncle. Together we made our way back to the cars. My father was doing well, but he asked me to drive home because his right leg was wounded from the shot. 2 shotgun pellets pierced through it. He sat there, calm and steady, as if this was just another day. The drive felt endless as I kept telling myself, just keep driving and get him back home, then to a hospital. It wasn't just the driving, it was the weight of seeing him hurt and trying to hold it together for his sake. The wilderness is filled with many mysteries and things unknown to man, spoken of only in myths and legends. But what if those stories are true? Why do so many cultures, separated by oceans and time, share stories with the same haunting similarities? Tales of shadowy figures, ancient forces, creatures of the forest, guardians, evil, and unexplainable phenomena that defy reason. Perhaps they are warnings. What we saw and experienced will challenge everything we consider logical. Remember to be respectful, for in the wilderness, eyes and ears are always upon you.